October 15, 1996, Brattleboro, Vermont. The autumn leaves painted the town in shades of gold and crimson, but inside the Victorian house on Maple Street, something was terribly wrong. Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old freelance photographer known for capturing the soul of abandoned places, had vanished while photographing her own home. The camera remained on its tripod, still running. The last frame showed nothing but an empty room in the attic. What happened in those missing hours would remain a mystery for 22 years. Before we begin the story, write in the comments which city you're from. We're very interested to know where you're watching our video from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. The morning had started like any other for David Mitchell. At 30 years old, he was building his software development company from their home office, while Sarah pursued her passion for architectural photography. They'd moved to Vermont just 6 months earlier, drawn by the promise of a simpler life and the Victorian house that Sarah had fallen in love with at first sight. "This house has such beautiful bones," she'd told the real estate agent, running her fingers along the original woodwork. "I want to capture its soul." 3 days before her disappearance, tension had surfaced in the Mitchell household. $7,000 for a camera, Sarah? David's voice had carried through the thin walls, reaching their neighbor who was raking leaves. "We're already stretched thin with the renovations." Sarah had defended the purchase as an investment in her career. The argument ended with David booking a last-minute business trip to Seattle, leaving 2 days later. The neighbor, an older gentleman named Thomas Black, had offered to help Sarah carry her equipment if she needed it. "I know every corner of that house," he'd mentioned casually. "My family has history with these old Victorians." October 15th began with Sarah's excitement. At the local coffee shop, she'd told the barista about her plans. "I'm doing a complete architectural series of our house today. Every room, every angle. It's going to make my portfolio." The timestamp on the receipt showed 2:30 p.m. She'd ordered her usual, a large coffee with extra cream, no sugar. The barista remembered because Sarah had seemed particularly animated, talking about how the afternoon light would be perfect for the attic shots. Robert Carlson, the contractor working on the Mitchell house, had been there that morning. At 45, he was known around Brattleboro as reliable but peculiar. He collected vintage cameras and often talked about his hobby to anyone who would listen. "Photography is about capturing moments that will never exist again," he'd once told Sarah, showing her his collection. That day, he claimed to have left for the hardware store around noon, though his truck was spotted by a jogger near the house at 3:30 p.m. Emma Foster had been more than Sarah's assistant. At 26, she was Sarah's closest friend in Vermont, someone who understood the artistic temperament and the challenges of building a photography business. Emma had stopped by that morning to drop off some prints from their last shoot. Sarah was focused more than usual, Emma would later tell investigators. "She kept talking about this being her breakthrough project. She even showed me a brass key she'd found in the house, said it might open something interesting." Thomas Black appeared at 3:15 p.m. The 56-year-old had lived next door for 3 years, always helpful, always watching. "I saw Sarah struggling with the tripod through the window," he'd explained. "Thought I'd offer a hand. These old houses, they have their quirks. Secret spaces, old coal chutes from when they burned coal for heat. My Uncle Henry owned this house back in the 50s. He was a photographer too, you know. Disappeared one day, never found." The last confirmed sighting of Sarah was at 3:15 p.m. when Thomas helped her carry equipment to the 3rd floor. "She was excited about the light," Thomas recalled. "Said the attic had this golden quality at that time of day. I helped set up the tripod and left her to her work. That's the last time anyone saw her." The camera's internal clock confirmed the last photograph was taken at 3:47 p.m. It showed the empty attic room, dust particles dancing in a shaft of sunlight. No sign of Sarah. David's flight from Seattle landed at 4:30 p.m. at Boston Logan Airport. Security footage confirmed his presence. The drive to Brattleboro typically took 3 hours, but David claimed he stopped for dinner, arriving home at 9:15 p.m. The house was dark, he remembered. Sarah's car was in the driveway. I called out, but there was no answer. Then I saw the camera in the attic, still running. The battery was almost dead, but Sarah was gone. The initial search focused on the obvious. Police found Sarah's purse in the kitchen, her cell phone on the counter. Nothing appeared disturbed, no signs of struggle. The only unusual detail was a thin layer of coal dust on the attic floor, which David couldn't explain. "We converted to oil heating years ago," the previous owner had told police. "Haven't used coal in that house since 1960. In Sarah's appointment book, investigators found routine entries, photography sessions, meetings with clients, a dental appointment the following week. But Emma Foster pointed out something odd. Sarah was meticulous about her schedule, but there were gaps, times when she'd written just initials, TB, with no explanation. She said they were research sessions for the house history. The film canister from Sarah's camera contained 34 exposed frames. When developed, they showed artistic shots of the house's interior, crown moldings, original fixtures, the play of light through antique glass. But in several frames, if you looked carefully at the shadows, there seemed to be something else, a presence just outside the frame. The photo lab technician noted it looked like someone watching from doorways, but the images were too dark to identify anyone. David became the primary suspect within days. The investigation uncovered $50,000 in debt from a failed startup venture. A life insurance policy for $200,000 had been purchased 6 months earlier, though Sarah had allegedly suggested it herself for mortgage protection. She was always the practical one about finances, David insisted. But his story had gaps. The restaurant where he claimed to have stopped had no record of him that evening. Robert Carlson's presence at the house raised questions. His alibi for 3:30 p.m. crumbled when the hardware store confirmed he'd been there in the morning, not the afternoon. When pressed, he admitted to driving by the house. "I wanted to check if Sarah needed help with the equipment. She'd mentioned the attic chute, and those stairs are steep. But I saw Thomas's car there, so I left." Emma Foster proved the most helpful. She provided what she claimed was Sarah's real diary, hidden in her darkroom. The entries spoke of feeling watched, of strange sounds in the house at night. "David doesn't believe me," Sarah had written, "but sometimes I feel like I'm not alone here, like the house is inhabited by more than just us." Emma suggested Robert might have developed an obsession. She'd noticed him photographing Sarah during her shoots, always from a distance. The brass key Sarah had found became a curious detail. David didn't recognize it. Robert claimed he'd never seen it. Thomas said old houses had many locks, most long forgotten. Emma remembered Sarah playing with it that morning, wondering what it might open. It was found in Sarah's car in the glove compartment, seemingly unimportant among the registration papers and insurance documents. As October turned to November, the case grew cold. Search teams had combed the surrounding woods. Divers checked the nearby reservoir. The house was searched top to bottom, walls checked for hidden spaces. Nothing. Sarah Mitchell had simply vanished. The camera's last image, that empty attic room, became a haunting reminder of a mystery without answers. The investigation intensified as November's chill settled over Vermont. Detective Patricia Hayes, brought in from the state police, began reconstructing the timeline with methodical precision. "Every disappearance leaves traces," she told the team. "We just need to find them." The focus shifted from searching for Sarah to understanding why she vanished. David Mitchell's 6-hour gap between landing and arriving home became the primary focus. Investigators traced his phone records, credit card transactions, searching for proof of his claimed dinner stop. The grief seemed genuine, Detective Hayes noted in her report, but genuine grief doesn't exclude guilt. The restaurant David mentioned, a small diner off Route 91, had no security cameras. The waitress vaguely remembered someone matching his description but couldn't confirm the date. The financial investigation revealed layers of stress in the Mitchell marriage. David's software startup had hemorrhaged money in the previous year. Investment documents showed desperate attempts to secure funding, including a second mortgage on the Vermont house that Sarah had reluctantly co-signed. "She supported my dreams," David said during questioning, "even when they were costing us everything." Bank records showed Sarah had been quietly building her photography business, recently landing a contract that would have cleared half their debt. Robert Carlson's storage unit opened a disturbing chapter. Police found dozens of photographs of Sarah, taken over the 6 months since the Mitchells moved to town. She was captured at coffee shops, walking her dog, working in her garden. None showed awareness of being photographed. "It's not illegal to take pictures in public spaces," Robert's lawyer argued. But the volume suggested obsession. More troubling were the vintage cameras in his collection. One, a 1950s Leica, had film still inside. When developed, it showed women from decades past, all bearing a striking resemblance to Sarah. Robert knew the house intimately, Emma Foster revealed. He'd done renovation work there for 3 different owners over 20 years. He once told Sarah about spaces behind walls, old servant passages from the Victorian era. He seemed to know every hidden corner. This information prompted a second, more thorough search of the house. K-9 units were brought in. They alerted to the basement wall where investigators had found traces of what might have been blood, though tests remained inconclusive. Thomas Black proved consistently helpful throughout the investigation. He provided historical documents about the house, including blueprints from 1892 that showed a coal delivery system with underground tunnels connecting several houses on the street. "My Uncle Henry used to talk about those tunnels," Thomas explained. "Kids would play in them before they were sealed off. At least, most of them were sealed." He produced photographs from the 1950s showing his uncle's photography studio in what was now the Mitchells' basement. The development chemicals found in the basement initially seemed to belong to Sarah's darkroom setup, but forensic analysis revealed 2 distinct sets: modern chemicals Sarah used and older compounds that hadn't been manufactured in decades. Someone else had been developing photographs in that space, the forensic chemist concluded. Recently, based on the oxidation patterns. Emma's role evolved as the investigation progressed. She revealed more about Sarah's state of mind in the weeks before her disappearance. She was paranoid, but maybe with reason. She'd found things moved in the house when David was away. Small things, a book relocated, a photograph turned face down. She thought she was going crazy. Emma had suggested Sarah document everything, leading to a series of photographs Sarah had taken of the house's interior, marking positions of objects. The vintage Leica camera found in the wall during renovations became a crucial piece of evidence. Research revealed it belonged to Henry Black, Thomas's uncle, who had disappeared in 1959. The camera contained a partially exposed roll of film. When developed with special techniques to preserve the aged emulsion, it revealed photographs of women, all appearing unconscious or deceased, all photographed in what appeared to be the same location, a stone-walled space that didn't match any room in the current house layout. Phone records revealed a pattern investigators had initially missed. Sarah had received calls from an unlisted number in the weeks before her disappearance. The calls lasted only seconds, suggesting hang-ups. The number traced to a payphone at a gas station 2 miles from the house. Security footage from the station was only kept for 2 weeks and had been overwritten. But the attendant remembered seeing Thomas Black using that phone occasionally. "Said his cell phone never got good reception," the attendant recalled. David's alibi suddenly solidified when a traffic camera photo surfaced showing his rental car at a toll booth at 5:45 p.m., precisely when he claimed. The timestamp and location made it impossible for him to have been in Brattleboro at 3:47 p.m. when Sarah disappeared. "I knew I wasn't crazy," David said, breaking down. "I knew I stopped for dinner. I just couldn't prove it." The photograph had been misfiled due to a clerical error, nearly destroying an innocent man's life. Robert's obsession took another turn when investigators discovered he'd been researching the Mitchell house for years, long before they moved in. Library records showed he'd checked out books on Victorian architecture, specifically focused on hidden spaces and construction techniques. He'd also researched the previous owners, including a particular interest in disappearances connected to the property. 5 people have vanished from that house or near it since 1950, Robert said when confronted. "Doesn't that strike you as odd?" The coal dust in the attic remained unexplained until a building inspector familiar with Victorian construction provided insight. Coal dust can travel through ventilation systems for decades. If someone accessed an old coal tunnel, the vibrations could shake loose dust that's been sitting in spaces between walls since the 1960s. This prompted a search for access points to the supposedly sealed tunnel system. Emma revealed she'd been conducting her own investigation. "Sarah wasn't the first photographer to disappear from that house. I found newspaper clippings from 1963, 1971, and 1984. All women, all artists or photographers, all vanished without a trace. The police never connected them because they were years apart, different last names. Some were just reported as runaways." She produced a folder of research that Sarah had been helping her compile. The investigation took a technological turn when a computer expert examined Sarah's laptop. Hidden in cached files were photographs Sarah had taken but deleted. They showed the house at night, taken from inside, with a figure visible in several frames standing in the garden, looking up at the windows. Enhancement revealed it was Thomas Black. The metadata showed these were taken 2 weeks before Sarah's disappearance. Thomas's helpful demeanor began to seem calculated. He always had explanations, always appeared at crucial moments. Investigators learned he'd suggested to Sarah that she photograph the house on October 15th specifically. "The light is perfect that time of year," he'd told her. He'd also mentioned his uncle's photography, creating a connection that made Sarah trust him. But every piece of evidence against him remained circumstantial. The brass key found in Sarah's car finally revealed its purpose when an antique lock specialist examined it. This is a Victorian-era coal chute key, very specific design, used in this region between 1890 and 1920. Armed with this knowledge, investigators searched for matching locks. They found one, painted over and forgotten, in the basement of Thomas Black's house. It opened to a narrow passage that connected to the old coal tunnel system. As the investigation entered its 3rd month, pressure mounted. David had cleared his name but remained in Brattleboro, refusing to leave without answers. Robert had been released due to lack of evidence, though surveillance continued. Emma had become an unofficial investigator, her research providing leads the police had missed. And Thomas Black continued his helpful neighbor routine, bringing coffee to search teams, offering historical insights, always present, always watching. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Martha Stevens, living in a Brattleboro nursing home, saw a news report about Sarah's disappearance. Despite her advanced age, her memory of certain events remained sharp. She called the police with information about Henry Black. "He taught his nephew everything," she said. "That poor boy, Thomas, spent every summer with Henry, learning about photography. Henry had ideas about beauty, about preserving it forever. He used to say the camera could capture souls." Martha Stevens's revelation shifted the entire investigation. At 91 years old, she had worked as a secretary at the Brattleboro Police Department in the 1950s. Henry Black was questioned several times about missing women, she revealed from her wheelchair, her voice steady despite her age. But he was charming, helpful, always had alibis. His nephew Thomas was always around, a quiet boy who watched everything. Henry used to say he was teaching him to see beauty differently. Detective Hayes ordered a comprehensive search of both properties with ground-penetrating radar. The technology revealed anomalies beneath Thomas Black's basement floor, spaces that shouldn't exist according to city blueprints. The coal tunnel system was more extensive than anyone had imagined, creating a network that connected 5 Victorian houses on Maple Street. Most entrances had been sealed, but the radar showed passages that remained accessible. The investigation took a dark turn when investigators entered the tunnels through Thomas's basement. The brass key from Sarah's car opened a door that had been used recently, its hinges well oiled. Beyond lay a stone corridor, cold and damp, leading to a larger chamber. There, investigators made a discovery that would finally solve not just Sarah's disappearance, but mysteries dating back decades. The chamber contained photography equipment spanning different eras, from Henry Black's 1950s cameras to modern digital equipment. On makeshift shelves carved into the stone walls were hundreds of photograph albums, meticulously organized by date. The earliest was marked 1952, the latest October 1996. Each album contained photographs of women, all taken in the same stone chamber, all showing the subjects in carefully posed positions. Sarah Mitchell's album was the newest, containing over 50 photographs taken on October 15th. The final images showed her discovering the hidden entrance, her expression changing from curiosity to recognition to fear. Thomas Black was arrested at his home without incident. At 78 years old in 2018, when the chamber was discovered, he had lived with his secret for decades. The 56-year-old man who had helped with the investigation in 1996 had aged but retained the same helpful demeanor. "I preserved them," he said calmly, as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. "Uncle Henry taught me that beauty fades unless we capture it." Sarah understood that. She was an artist. The interrogation revealed a lifetime of careful planning and horrific execution. Thomas had learned from his uncle's mistakes. Where Henry had been careless, Thomas was meticulous. He chose victims who were new to town, who hadn't established strong social networks. He gained their trust through his helpful neighbor persona, his knowledge of local history, his apparent harmlessness. "People see an older man offering to help and they don't see danger," he explained without emotion. "I was just continuing Uncle Henry's work." The October 15th timeline finally became clear. Thomas had entered the Mitchell house through the coal tunnel while Sarah was photographing the second floor. He'd watched her work, waiting for the perfect moment. When she reached the attic, he'd emerged from a hidden panel behind the walls. "She wasn't supposed to find the entrance," Thomas admitted. "But she had that key, started exploring. I had to act sooner than planned." The empty photograph that haunted investigators for 22 years had captured the moment after Thomas had taken Sarah through the hidden panel, leaving only dust motes in sunlight. Emma Foster's research proved more accurate than anyone had realized. The 5 missing women she'd identified were all found photographed in Thomas's albums. Each had been an artist or photographer, each had lived in or visited one of the connected Victorian houses. The pattern spanned from 1963 to 1996, with gaps that coincided with periods when Thomas had lived elsewhere for work. "I always came back," he said. "This was home. This was where Uncle Henry taught me everything." Robert Carlson, despite his obsessive behavior, had been innocent of Sarah's disappearance, but guilty of recognizing a pattern. His research into the house's history had brought him dangerously close to the truth. "I knew something was wrong with that house," he said when cleared. "The women who disappeared, they all looked similar. I started photographing Sarah to document, to protect her. I failed." His vintage camera collection, investigators learned, had been an attempt to understand the historical disappearances. David Mitchell had lived 22 years under suspicion. When Thomas Black's arrest was announced, David was 52 years old, his hair gray, his software career destroyed by the cloud of suspicion. He had never left Brattleboro, never sold the house, keeping Sarah's photography studio exactly as she'd left it. "I knew she didn't just leave," he said, tears flowing freely. "I knew someone took her. I just couldn't prove it." The town that had whispered about him for 2 decades struggled with its collective guilt. The technical evidence against Thomas was overwhelming. DNA technology that hadn't existed in 1996 now connected him to items in the chamber. Fingerprints were found on photograph albums despite his attempts to wear gloves. Most damning was a journal written in Henry's hand but continued by Thomas, documenting their artistic preservation of beauty. The entries about Sarah were detailed, planning that had begun the moment the Mitchells moved to Maple Street. The coal tunnel system told its own story. Engineers determined that while most entrances had been sealed in the 1960s, Thomas had carefully maintained access points through 3 properties: his own home, the Mitchell house, and an abandoned property between them. He'd reinforced collapsing sections, installed modern lighting in certain areas, created a hidden underground network that allowed him to move unseen. The chamber where he took his victims had been expanded over the years, carved from natural cave systems that predated the houses above. Martha Stevens provided more crucial testimony. Henry Black disappeared in 1959 because he knew police were closing in, but Thomas told everyone Henry had gone to California. No one questioned a 20-year-old boy about his missing uncle. Thomas inherited the house, the photography equipment, and apparently something much darker. She revealed that she'd always suspected Thomas knew more than he said, but without evidence, her suspicions had remained just that. The photograph albums revealed the full scope of the horror. 12 women over 44 years, each carefully documented. The early victims from Henry's era showed different techniques, more primitive. Thomas had refined the approach, his documentation more extensive. He'd written names, dates, and what he called artistic notes about each session. The clinical detachment in his descriptions chilled even veteran investigators. Thomas's confession came without remorse. He spoke of his uncle's teachings as if describing an apprenticeship in any ordinary craft. Uncle Henry believed photography could capture more than just images. He thought if you photographed someone at the right moment, you preserved their essence forever. The delusion ran so deep that Thomas seemed genuinely puzzled by the horror his actions had caused. In his mind, he'd been creating art, preserving beauty that would otherwise fade. The investigation revealed how Thomas had manipulated the 1996 investigation. He'd suggested search areas he knew were empty. He'd provided historical information that led investigators away from the tunnel system. He'd comforted David while subtly reinforcing suspicions about Robert. Most disturbing, he'd attended Sarah's memorial service, even speaking about what a talented photographer she'd been. "She really did understand composition," he said during interrogation. "Her work deserved to be preserved." The other victims' families finally had answers. The woman who disappeared in 1963 had been visiting her sister in the connected Victorian house. The 1971 victim had been an art student renting a room. Each story followed a pattern: women with artistic sensibilities, limited social connections, and access to one of the tunnel-connected properties. Thomas had waited, sometimes for years, for the right subjects. His patience had been his shield against detection. The discovery made national news. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. The Victorian houses on Maple Street became infamous, property values plummeting. The tunnel system was filled with concrete on court order, but not before urban explorers and journalists documented the extensive network. The chamber where the women had been photographed became a crime scene that took months to fully process. Emma Foster, who had inadvertently helped Thomas by providing him information about Sarah's schedule, struggled with guilt. "I thought I was being a good friend, sharing Sarah's plans with the helpful neighbor. He seemed so interested in her work, so supportive." She'd actually facilitated several meetings between Sarah and Thomas, never suspecting she was enabling a predator. The revelation broke something in her. She left Vermont, unable to continue her photography career. The trial began in 2019. Thomas Black, then 79, showed no emotion as prosecutors detailed his crimes. The photograph albums were entered as evidence, though heavily restricted from public view. Families of victims testified about decades of not knowing, of false hopes, of accusations against innocent people. David Mitchell testified about 22 years of suspicion, of a life destroyed by Thomas's manipulation of evidence. The defense attempted an insanity plea, arguing that Henry Black's influence had created a shared delusion. Psychiatric evaluations revealed Thomas understood right from wrong, but believed his actions were justified by a higher artistic purpose. "He's not insane," the prosecution's psychiatrist testified. "He's a narcissist who valued his perceived art over human lives." The jury agreed, finding Thomas guilty on all counts. During sentencing, Thomas made a statement that chilled the courtroom. "Future generations will understand what Uncle Henry and I were trying to do. We were documenting beauty before it faded. Sarah Mitchell's photographs still exist because of me. In a way, she achieved immortality through my work." The judge sentenced him to life without parole, noting that Thomas showed no remorse and remained a danger to society. The aftermath rippled through Brattleboro for years. The Victorian houses on Maple Street were eventually demolished. The land turned into a memorial garden for the victims. David Mitchell finally left Vermont, but not before donating Sarah's photography equipment to a scholarship fund for young artists. The brass key that had been crucial to solving the case was placed in a police museum, a reminder of how small details can unlock enormous truths. Robert Carlson, cleared but forever changed, wrote a book about recognizing patterns in criminal behavior. His obsessive documentation, while crossing ethical lines, had created an archive that helped establish timelines during the trial. He donated all proceeds to victims' families, attempting to find redemption for his failures. "I saw the danger but couldn't articulate it," he wrote. "My silence made me complicit." The discovery of Henry Black's remains in the tunnel system added another chapter. He hadn't fled to California as Thomas had claimed. He'd died in the tunnels, and Thomas had simply continued his work. The skeleton showed signs of a head injury, leading investigators to suspect Thomas might have killed his mentor, though he never admitted to this. "Uncle Henry taught me everything," was all he would say on the subject. In 2020, advances in photography analysis revealed something horrifying in Sarah's final photographs. In the reflection of an antique mirror in one corner of the empty attic frame, enhanced beyond what 1996 technology could achieve, Thomas Black's face was visible. He'd been watching from the hidden panel, waiting. Sarah had unknowingly photographed her killer moments before her disappearance. The image became one of the most chilling pieces of evidence in true crime history. The case changed how missing persons investigations were conducted in Vermont. The tunnel system discovery led to surveys of other Victorian-era neighborhoods, finding similar forgotten infrastructure. Training now emphasized looking for historical connections, understanding that crimes could span generations. The Black case became required study at the FBI Academy, an example of how patient predators could operate for decades undetected. Thomas Black died in prison in 2021, taking some secrets with him. Investigators believed there might have been other victims between 1984 and 1996, but Thomas never confirmed this. His death brought little closure to families who'd waited decades for justice. Martha Stevens, who'd provided crucial testimony, passed away shortly after the trial, having lived just long enough to see justice served. The final chapter came with the complete excavation of the tunnel system before its destruction. Investigators found evidence of Henry Black's activities dating to the 1940s, suggesting the killing had spanned nearly 60 years between uncle and nephew. Personal effects from victims were recovered and returned to families. Sarah Mitchell's camera bag was found preserved in a sealed container, her unused film still inside, a photographer's tools waiting for work that would never be completed. David Mitchell, in a 2022 interview, reflected on the case's resolution. For 22 years, people thought I killed my wife. Thomas Black took Sarah, but he also took my life, my reputation, my future. Finding the truth didn't give me back those decades. He'd remarried but kept Sarah's photograph in his wallet. She deserved to have her story told, to have the world know she died pursuing her art, not at the hands of her husband. The Vermont House of Shadows, as media called it, became a cautionary tale about trusting helpful strangers, about the dangers of isolation, about how evil could hide behind a friendly face. Thomas Black had been the perfect neighbor for decades, helpful, knowledgeable, always there when needed. His mask never slipped until that October day when Sarah Mitchell found the wrong door and looked too closely at the shadows in her beautiful house. The photographs Thomas and Henry Black had taken were sealed by court order, never to be displayed. But Sarah Mitchell's artistic photography, recovered from her studio, was exhibited posthumously in galleries across New England. Her images of abandoned places and forgotten architecture took on new meaning, especially the series she'd been working on called Hidden Spaces. In trying to capture the soul of her house, she'd unknowingly documented the lair of her killer. The case remains one of the most disturbing in Vermont history, not just for the number of victims or the span of years, but for how completely Thomas Black had integrated himself into the community while harboring such darkness. Every memorial service, every search party, every moment of comforting grieving families had been a performance. The helpful neighbor had been the monster all along, hiding in plain sight for over half a century. Today, the memorial garden where Maple Street once stood blooms with 13 different varieties of flowers, one for each confirmed victim. A photography scholarship in Sarah Mitchell's name has helped dozens of young artists. The brass key that broke the case is displayed in a crime museum with a simple placard. Sometimes the smallest details unlock the biggest truths. The Vermont House of Shadows is gone, but the lessons it taught about vigilance, about patterns, about the patience of predators, remain. The final truth was perhaps the most disturbing. Thomas Black hadn't seen himself as a killer, but as an artist, a curator of beauty. In his mind, the women he photographed were preserved forever, their beauty captured at its peak. This delusion, passed from uncle to nephew like a poisoned inheritance, had created decades of grief. The camera, a tool meant to preserve memories and create art, had become a weapon in the hands of 2 generations of killers who confused possession with preservation, control with art, and murder with immortality.